Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Bizarre Podcast. I'm going to take you back in time a little bit to 1995, when I was 12 years old. A TV series called Strange But True aired on television. A British TV host named Michael Aspel presented the paranormal TV show, telling stories of ghosts, mysteries, and UFO encounters. Every week, I would plant myself firmly in front of the TV and become totally engrossed by the stories. There was one particular episode that after all these years, I never forgot. The Enfield poltergeist episode, covering the terrifying haunting in a house not unlike my own. I loved every minute of that episode, even though that night, when I went to bed, it gave me nightmares. Before we start the episode, I'll give you a little bit of insight into what a poltergeist is. Poltergeist, German for noisy ghost or noisy spirit, is a type of ghost or spirit that is responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects being moved or destroyed. They are reportedly capable of pinching, biting, hitting and tripping people. Most accounts of poltergeist describe the movements or levitation of objects, such as furniture and cutlery, or noises such as knocking on doors. All of these things and more will appear in today's story. The Enfield Poltergeist. It was on the 31st of August 1977, on a quiet North London street, that one of the best documented investigations of paranormal activity had ever taken place, and became one of the most famous poltergeist cases the world has ever seen. At the address of 284 Green Street, Enfield, lived a single mother, Peggy Hodgson, and her children. The children included two young girls named Margaret, aged 14, and Janet, aged 11. Peggy also had two young sons, Johnny aged 10 and Billy aged 7, although most of the activity would mainly revolve around the two girls, especially Janet. The activity started one night as the children were getting ready for bed. It was just an ordinary night, like any other. All of a sudden Peggy could hear a lot of banging and screaming coming from the girls' bedroom. She rushed into the room to tell the girls to keep it down, only to see them sitting there terrified, staring at a set of heavy drawers that had been moved from the usual position to the middle of the room. The girls swore it had moved on its own, but Peggy didn't believe the girls and attempted to push the heavy set of drawers back into place. A few seconds later, the drawers were back against the wall, and Peggy, out of breath, turned to her kids and insisted they stop messing around and get ready for bed. At that instant, the set of drawers flew from the wall right back into the middle of the room, as Peggy, Janet and Margaret were left frozen in fear. This was followed by a loud unsettling knocking coming from all the walls in the room surrounding them. The family fled the house screaming, in nothing but their pyjamas, and ran across the road and banged on the door of their neighbours, Vic and Peggy Nottingham. The family frantically explained what had just happened in their upstairs bedroom. Vic Nottingham was not the kind of man to scare easily, and volunteered to go over to the Hodgson house to investigate. The Hodgson family went over with him, but insisted that they stay downstairs. He inspected the dark, empty rooms and noticed a knocking sound following him around the house. Vic started to feel a little spooked, like he was being watched by unseen eyes. He decided to go back down the stairs and talk to the Hodgson family. You see, what we need to keep in mind is that Vic was a builder by trade and knew a thing or two about household plumbing, but he admitted that he couldn't blame the knocking noises on old water pipes or creaky floorboards. As they stood in the living room discussing this, a louder, more intense knocking came from directly above their heads, from the ceiling. Vic tried to hold his composure, but ultimately, he couldn't help but look shaken. He then suggested they ring the police. When the police arrived, you can imagine their initial reaction to the whole story, and suggested that maybe it was nothing more than a prank played by the children. As the police officer, WPC Carolyn Heaps, asked her questions, she was horrified to see an old wooden chair move across the floor with no assistance. In a later television interview with WPC Carolyn Heaps, she described how she did indeed see the chair move a few feet across the floor, and was definitely not pushed. She then goes on to explain how she tried in vain to debunk what she had just seen with her two eyes, but in the end had no explanation. The fact is that a police officer with such a respectable career would risk ridicule on television only adds more credence to this case. The police had no choice but to leave after making sure that there was no risk, at least from the living. WPC Carolyn Heaps made the suggestion that they seek out other forms of help. At a loss, and not knowing where to turn next, Peggy and the Nottinghams decided to see if the British tabloids could help. The family decided to get in contact with the Daily Mirror newspaper, and if it wasn't for the police officer's statement, the rest that follows may never have taken place. The Daily Mirror sent Graham Morris, a photographer, and Douglas Bentz, a journalist, to the Hodgson household, and was welcomed by a tired-looking Peggy. After pleasantries were exchanged, they were welcomed in, and sat down and waited for something to happen. After a few hours sat in the house, waiting for anything, cameras at the ready, just waiting to capture any sort of paranormal activity, the two men became more and more impatient. They came to the conclusion that they had wasted their time and prepared to leave, leaving Peggy feeling at a loss. Douglas and Graham left the house. As Graham was loading his equipment into his car, Vic came running out, urging them to return to the house right away. As they rushed into the living room, they could see Peggy and her children in hysterics, trying to get out of the way of multiple objects that flew around the room, such as Lego bricks, marbles, and ashtrays that smashed and rebounded off the walls. Graham grabbed his camera and tried to back himself up into the corner of the room away from the flying objects. As he was doing this, he was hit on the forehead by a Lego brick. It hit him so hard on the forehead that it left a mark. Abruptly, the activity ended as soon as it had started, leaving everyone in the room very shaken. Graham did manage to take a few pictures, but unfortunately the photographs taken showed no evidence of what had occurred. This frustrated Graham and Douglas, and only encouraged them to try and capture some hard evidence, but to do so, they would need more help from someone who knew a little more about the paranormal than they did. They decided to reach out to the Society of Psychical Research, who sent out their newest member, inventor and paranormal investigator, Maurice Gross. Initially, Maurice was unsure what to make of the claims of the haunting, thinking it may all be a hoax, or maybe the family wanted their 5 minutes of fame with the tabloids. But after a few nights, and after witnessing some strange happenings in the home, he became convinced that this was all worthwhile, and suggested this was all down to a poltergeist. Maurice decided he would need more help, and invited writer and journalist Guy Lyon Playfair to join the investigation, due to his background in paranormal investigations. Over the next 14 months, the investigators ended up spending the majority of the time staying with the family, to comfort and to try and capture some sort of evidence of the poltergeist activity. It wasn't long before the supposed haunting caught the eye of the BBC radio service, who sent out one of their top reporters, Ros Morris, to investigate the story that was capturing the attention of Britain. On her first night, as the whole family slept, Roz and Maurice sat downstairs as he filled her in on the investigation so far. As they sat in the living room, there came a loud bang coming from directly above Maurice and Roz's head. It was coming from the girls' bedroom. They rushed up the stairs and flew open the bedroom door to find, in the middle of the room, a chair that was originally standing next to Janet's bed, tipped over. Roz took out her microphone and started to document what had happened, and she couldn't help but notice that the girls were both fast asleep. Not long after the incident, the activity started to escalate, and the family started to feel safer sleeping in the same room. One night, Janet informed her mother that she could hear a scraping sound coming from the fireplace that was upstairs in the bedroom. The scraping turned into a loud vibrating noise, like the walls were coming down around them. Guy rushed into the bedroom and witnessed the fireplace being ripped from the wall by some invisible force and flying over the bed and coming down on the ground in a tremendous crash, and leaving everyone in the room shocked and terrified. Maurice Gross commented on the sheer weight of the gas fire, that he could not lift it, so there was no possibility two young girls could either. All of the activity seemed to occur even more so around the youngest daughter, Janet. Gross thought this was probably due to puberty, as this seems to attract poltergeists. Gross decided to have Janet tested for any chance that she could perhaps influence metal to move or vibrate or bend, like the famous spoon bender Uri Geller. Janet was told to place her hand 6 inches away from the spoon with no touching. Within a minute or so, the spoon did indeed bend, and by the end of the experiment, the spoon was successfully bent fully, with no touch from Janet at all. Guy Lyon Playfair had a theory that the activity could have been due to the breakup of Peggy and her husband, leaving Peggy with the children to bring up alone, with very little money coming into the house, creating a very unhappy home, and creating the perfect environment for a haunting. 2 months after the first incident, the activity carried on increasing in volume as time went on. October rolled around, and the nights were getting darker as the occurrences got stronger and stronger, and this was seriously taking its toll on the family. Maurice decided to send the family away on holiday to Clacton-on-Sea to give them a well-deserved break. The holiday was delightful, and a certain weight had been lifted, but unknown to Peggy and the children, the activity was going to return with a vengeance as soon as they returned home. When the family arrived home, it was all back to normal, and one night as the girls slept, they were awoke by once again loud banging coming from the bedroom floor. Maurice entered the room to calm the girls and decided to try and communicate with the spirit. He asked aloud if the culprit of the knocking could answer with 1 knock for no and 2 for yes. He then took a deep breath and asked the source of the knocking if it had died in the house. Maurice didn't get 1 knock or 2, he got a total of 53 knocks. This annoyed Maurice, who then asked if the spirit was playing some sort of game with him. Suddenly, a box from the corner of the room flew into the air and hit Maurice square in the face, followed by a pillow. After this, as you can probably understand, he decided to call it a night with the communication. 3 months into the case, Janet's behaviour started to concern everyone. She started drawing disturbing, bloody images. She also started to go into a trance-like state, and she began having fits, and sometimes this would force her to bang her head into the wall many times. Maurice became worried she may injure herself. A doctor was called, and after the doctor's checkup, he decided to give Janet a sedative to calm her. Later, Janet would awake from the sedated sleep in pure darkness and pure terror, screaming for help as she realised she had been placed on top of her radio player, which was sitting on top of her chest of drawers. This was witnessed by her uncle as he entered the room to help her down. Another incident that was caught on audio